Brothers and sisters, good morning to you. And good morning to our co-workers. I'm so pleased to see you all here. So our co-workers return to work in office now. We're thankful that the pandemic is slowing down, easing. And the government measures has been relaxed as well. And it's right after our 40-day fasting and prayer, everything is improving. We are facing difficulties. We faced a social movement before. The society was in turmoil. Right after that, the pandemic broke out. It has lasted for over 2 years. Who could have ever imagined that the pandemic would have lasted like over 2 years? And it has not stopped. And we don't know how this pandemic could end. We cannot picture what will happen at the end of this pandemic. We look forward that, yes, please go over. Please stop straight away as soon as possible. But what will happen at the end? Do we need to go through this mass testing? The Hong Kong people, should we stay at zero policy or herd immunity? Which policy should we adopt? What will happen at the end? So many countries will just they adopt the policy to live with the virus. Many countries are doing that. It's just like the COVID. It's just like a flu, a cold and a flu. But the Hong Kong government and the Chinese government still adopt this zero policy. So how can Hong Kong and China connect with the rest of the world? Does it work if every other country is going through live with the virus? But here we have zero policy. How does that work? How can we connect with the world? I can't ever imagine. But I believe that one day there will be a way out for us. That's my belief. Don't think too much about it. We live a good life. Yeah, we enjoy our life. And then now we start to do a lot of relief action. But I can see that these difficult days, these sufferings, days of sufferings, days of the pandemic, days of is actually it's getting worse and worse because the world is getting more and more messy. The nature is being destroyed more and more. The global warming, the pollution on the whole earth. And we become more and more wicked in our hearts. And we are opposing each other more and more. The technology is getting better and better as well. I'm quite outdated and like few generation behind the technology. We have the virtual world, right? Virtual reality. I still do not understand this virtual reality. How can it be virtual and reality? We have this VR thing going on, right? Well, what is that? How does that work? To me, it's a mystery. Are these good? Are these things good? or it will cause and contribute to the world's chaos. That people lack of sense of security. And then we attack on each other more and more. Before media was exploding, before the internet was exploding, we do not send such attack on social media and everything as fierce as now. But now social media is like absolutely blooming and is more and more powerful. Anyone can have your background check, and then you can be attacked and bullied online. That's why I do not go on Facebook. I don't know what Facebook is about. And because of that, I'm behind the trend more and more. But I noticed one thing. When the world is going to this direction, we stand still. We do not follow the world. We do not follow the direction of the world. Yes, we are actually getting further and further away from the world. But we are getting closer and closer to God. That's why we speak to the world. We can speak to the world. Because the presence of God is with us. So in comparison, our relationship with God is closer and closer, and the world is getting further and further away from God. So we really take up the position as a priest. For all these years, we are still protected by God. We are still standing right here. So it's okay not to go on Facebook. Yes, it served its purpose. We do not need to follow the world. What I'm trying to say is trying to let you understand how do we face the present suffering, present difficulties. The world is getting harder and harder on us. So what should we do? That's what the main theme of today's chapter. The spiritual armor that overcomes spiritual suffering. The spiritual armors that overcomes the greatest trial, the greatest fire, the greatest suffering. The world is getting harder and harder. How do we go on? The spiritual armor that overcomes suffering. To Peter, suffering means the Jews was facing the greatest suffering at that time. It was the hardest suffering. So we hold on. We understanding their background. We comprehend a truth, how we can overcome, we can face the difficulties. Our world is getting harder and harder these days. I believe that we're able to walk through this difficulty. But how about the next one? There will be more and more difficulties ahead of us. So we have 4 kinds of spiritual armors we desperate need. I divide chapter 4 of 1 Peter into 4 paragraphs. In each paragraph, there is one spiritual armor. The first one, the freedom to overcome the test or trial. Yes, we have freedoms. We have freedoms, that means we can choose. In the midst of all difficulties, we have the freedom to choose. Verse 1 to 6, that's the first paragraph. Therefore, since Christ suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same mind. For he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. Here, arm yourselves also with the same mind. So arm yourself, so I would say that is one of the armors, one of the weapons. For he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sins. Verse 1. Christ has suffered in the flesh. We need to be like Christ. We arm ourselves also with the same mind. Verse 1. With the same mind, just like Christ, who has suffered in the flesh. The mind of Christ, he has suffered in the flesh. So we shall be just like Christ. We suffer in the flesh and we arm ourselves with the same mind. So arm ourselves with the mind of getting ready to suffer, to arm ourselves this way, this mind. Because we have suffered in the flesh, there is a purpose, a meaning to our suffering. After we suffer in the flesh, then we will cease from sin. Then sin will be stopped. We can overcome suffering. We can overcome sin. Because Christ has suffered in the flesh. As he suffered in the flesh, he has ceased from sin. As Christ suffered in the flesh, he has overcome sin, delivered us from sin. So as we suffer in the sin, this is the meaning of us suffering in the sin, in the flesh. We don't have freedom in sin, but because we have ceased from sin, because we are willing to suffer in the flesh just as Christ did, then we have also ceased from sin. If we have such the mind, we live ourselves this way, the mind that we are ready to suffer as we continue to live this way, that he no longer should live in the rest of his time in the flesh for the lust of man, but for the will of God. Verse 2. No longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh for the lusts of man. Verse 2. You may be able to live not for the lust of man, but for the will of God. Live the rest of your time. You have such freedom. Can you see? You have ceased from sin. You have the freedom not to live in the flesh for the lust of man, but for the will of God. This freedom to overcome suffering is the consequences of the mind that is ready to suffer in the flesh. Verse 3, for we have spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles when we walk in lewdness, lust, drunkenness, revelries, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. You have done all this, done enough of that. Now you have ceased from sin. You don't have to do it anymore. But for the unbelievers, those who attack you, in regard to this, they think it strange that you do not run with them in the same flood of dissipation, speaking evil of you. They will give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. Verse 4 and 5. We must have the mind to suffer in the flesh, then we'll have such freedom, and we can submit and live for the will of God. And we do not live for the lust of man, and live the rest of our time. With this mind of suffering, we walk towards eternity. however corrupt the world becomes, we can choose not to follow the world. We choose to follow God and submit to the will of God. And we keep going forward towards the eternity. Because we know that we'll be judged by God and give an account to Him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. If you indulge yourself, you slander others. Yes, you slander me now. It's okay. I suffer. Yes, that's true. But in the future, you shall give an account to God, and I shall give an account to God. If you slander me, and I slander you in return, if you mistreat me, I mistreat you even more. And together we may lose our salvation. I walk towards the world. I walk towards the darkness. But I have the freedom. I choose to walk in the path of eternity and submit to God. I'm willing to suffer loss. What is Peter telling us? The Roman emperor at the time, the Judaism at the time, the Jews were saying, we need to, reform. We need to rebel against the Roman emperor. For the sake of our people, we want to have our own nations, our own freedom. But the freedom that Peter talked about is the freedom of not sin. Not the freedom to fight against the Roman emperor. Towards the Roman emperor, even the wicked government we should honor. This truth is hard, but it's in the Bible. It's the truth. It's the word that Peter gave to the Christians who are suffering. The Christians at the time faced the persecution from Roman emperor. It was really, really hard. I give you some example. If they say that you are a Christian, then they take you away. They soak the skin in water, animal skin, soaking wet animal skin. They will strip you naked. They wrap you with the wet animal skin. They put you up in a stick under the sun. Then the animal skin will shrink. How do you feel? The skin shrink and then you will be squashed. You could not breathe, you could not move. And then people may die of suffocation. And then they pour some oil on the person. They light up the skin. And then burn a person like a candle. There's the test of fire. Suffering of fire. That's what they are facing. But Peter was telling them, have the mind of suffering in the flesh. People beat you up, don't beat them up in return. If people bully you, don't bully them, don't take revenge. You need to submit to the authority. It's so hard. It's so hard. But Peter said, you have the freedom to do it. Salvation is to give us freedom. Why do we want to do this? because there will be a judgment ahead. At the end, there is a judgment. When we read the book of Esther, we know, yes, there will be a turnaround at the end. Yes, however suffering we are facing, in the future, we will be glorious to the same extent. We have such freedom to choose. Verse 6, for this reason the gospel was preached also to those who are dead, that they may be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the spirit. It is not easy to understand this verse. So it tells us that there will be judgment. Using the example of Noah, chapter 3, verse 18, 19. For Christ also suffered once for sin, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive by the Spirit, by whom he went and preached to the spirits in prison, who formerly were disobedient, where once the divine long-suffering waited in the day of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 souls, were saved through the water. Chapter 8, verse 18, 19, and 20. I wrote a thesis on this part of scriptures when I was doing the seminary. So I want you to be simple and pure, though. I will not tell you some people comment on this, some people interpret this, and it will cause confusion. That Jesus Christ, in the days of Noah, through Noah, he preached to the people at the time. Noah was prepared. It took Noah 100 years to prepare the ark. It was just like preaching to the unbelievers at the time. So the Spirit of Christ had preached to the people at the time through Noah. Because ark represents judgment. That's a judgment on the whole earth. God says that man's sin is so much that the flood must come. So Noah prepared an ark. But the people at the time did not believe. Only 8 souls believed and went into the ark. So Noah testified and preached the good news to the people. And then judgment came. So Peter, quoting the story of Noah, he told the people, the Christians at the time, those who went through suffering, the end shall come quickly. The judgment shall come quickly. How Noah preached to the people at the time, and today we should preach to the people at the present time. Here it says that the people in the prison, at the time of Peter writing this, people in the days of Noah died. They are in the spirit of prison. But in the days of Noah, those people were alive. I will stop here. Verse 6. For this reason, the gospel was preached also to those who are dead. Those who are dead refer to the people in the days of Noah. They were living, but now they are dead. So those who are dead now, we see, have the gospel preached to them at the time. But during that time, they were judged. Everyone must give an account. So they must give an account to God. I will stop here due to time. Now the second paragraph. Verse 7 to 11 is the second paragraph. The power to overcome suffering. We have the freedom to overcome suffering. And the second thing, Peter mentioned a few things. Where is our power to overcome suffering? But the end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be serious and watchful in your prayer. That's the first one. The first power to overcome suffering is that we know that the end of all things is at hand. Brother and sister, that's true. As we go further and further, as the world is getting harder and harder, the end of all things, the days shall be getting harder and harder. We have many cult, we have pandemic, we have earthquake, we have pollution, all kinds of things. And then we have wars, we have tyranny, attack on people that will increase, that will worsen. Because the power of each person is getting bigger and bigger. But each person is getting more and more wicked. Our heart is getting more wicked. Our power is getting stronger. What will happen? We must guard our heart. Do not let our heart be corrupt. Our power does not lie in the world. Our power lies in our spiritual armor. Our power lies in God. So here, be watchful. Watchful prayer. We need to be sound-minded. We need to have a sound mind. Do not be confused in mind. We have a lot of situation information going on. The world gives a lot of pressure in order to confuse our mind. And our mind will be led astray and follow the world. Then we must ask ourselves, and it's not good for me, is it? So what can I do? So I don't have the sense of security. No. Okay, I want to fight back. If you treat me, then your mind is confused. Be sound-minded. Our mind, our thoughts must be clear. Let the truth reign. The salvation of Christ continue to be here. Eternal life shall still be here. Remember that we serve God. We do not serve the world. We are just a traveler, foreigner on earth. We are strangers. That's why Peter's address to the audience, those who scattered in the, you are the holy nation, the royal priesthood, the godly people. You are the spiritual temple of God. What people rejected, but God has chosen you, that the Holy Spirit lives in you. That's the spiritual house, the temple. You are to declare the glory of the light, of the creator of the light. You are not to follow the world. It is really hard. It's not easy to do that. But let your mind not be confused. You need to be watchful in prayer. You need to be watchful. So in order to avoid that your mind be confused, do not be drunk. Do not numb yourself indulge yourself and follow the world. You need to go into prayers. Watchful in your prayer. Connect with God. Prayer is our power. So 40-day fasting and prayer, we saw the power. When the world is in chaos, we need to be sound-minded, we need to be alert, and we pray. The second power, above all things, have fervent love for one another. We need to love one another. The third power, be hospitable to one another without grumbling. As a Christian community, together we face such pressure, tension. We need to love one another and be hospitable, host one another without grumbling. It's easy for us to grumble. Why? Because if their house has been burned down or their husband has been killed, we must look after them. We need to host them. We need to provide all their needs. They stay in your house, then it's a lot of inconvenience, right? It's easy to be friends, but not easy to live together. You cannot stand the way that they live their life, but, we never like the way that people live their own life. Everyone is a weird people. The more I disciple, then I realize that everyone is weird. And then Deborah sitting there, she's the strangest person on earth. I like to talk about her. And she likes to persecute me, bully me. We tend to grumble. Why am I the one who keep providing for you? You want to give, but your children may not want to do that. There are a lot of problems. We need to be hospitable to one another without grumbling. Power to overcome suffering. A community is important, but our community is important. During this pandemic, we have exercised our full potential as a community. So co-workers live in different places. They live in different districts. And then we have kind of like the leader in each district. If anything goes wrong within a community, to a co-worker in that district, they are isolated, and then people will give them material and support. We have only experienced a little bit of this compared to what happened to Peter. We are just a trivial thing compared to what the people in Peter's time went through. Be hospitable to one another without grumbling, and love one another. Be of sound mind and watchful in our prayers. And then verse 10, the fourth power. As each one has received a gift, minister it to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. God has given us gifts. So the gifts including our spiritual resources, preaching, teaching, prayer, helping one another. And the earthly materials. Maybe you have a lot, or you're good at administration. And then Marie, MG leader Joey, they were good. They just simply they stood up. They stood to the post. They organized and planned when co-workers got infected, what they need, their materials and everything. Some co-workers, when they got infected, they didn't know they were infected. So Marie needs to, have a sharp eyes to find out who is infected and who is not. So she needs to be a good steward of the manifold grace of God. So you have the power to overcome suffering. 4 areas. What is the third armor? Verse 12 to 16. The hope to overcome, the hope of going through the suffering. Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you. Verse 12. They are going through some strange things. The fiery trial has come upon them. Jerusalem was destroyed. The Holy Temple was destroyed, burned down by fire. This revolution will be fought. The plan will be destroyed, and the Christians will be killed, will be charged. So it's so hard. So we are so upset. The life is so hard. No, we have hope. But rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. Verse 13. This hope is for eternity. In eternity, we will receive glory. So we receive glory in eternity, and we rejoice, and we will be praised. Especially as we go through the fiery trial, it will show that our faith is stronger than gold. We will receive praise from God. That's what happened in the future. I will rejoice. Now, as I face the suffering, I must rejoice. How do I rejoice? Yes, it's really painful. But in our hope, we seize the glory ahead of us, the future glory. Then I consider my present suffering as nothing. Then I can overcome my present suffering. Let the joy and glory in the future come now. Yes, I suffer, I am persecuted. I consider this persecution as a joy, because there will be glory ahead of me. And now I partake of Christ's suffering. I suffer in the flesh so that I may cease from sin. I have hope. When I first came to Christ, I was 20. I told my mom that I'm a Christian now. And she slapped me on the face. My glasses was out. My mom was furious. You want to be a monk? The Buddhist. Oh, you don't want your mom anymore. She thought that becoming a Christian is like becoming a monk. So she did not let me believe in Jesus. So she beat me up. It's a fake stick to carry a burden. Don't worry. It's a fake stick, and then she slapped me on my thigh. I did not move. I did not run away. I did not resist. I stood there and said, even if you beat me up, I will believe in Jesus. She was beating me up and she was crying. It's pointless to beat me up. That's why I know that God really loves me. I suffer in the flesh for Jesus, suffer with Christ together. Because I have hope in me. I know eternity is for real. So rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's suffering, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. If you are reproached for the name of Christ, blessed are you, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. Verse 16, yes, if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in this matter. God's glory is in us. Last paragraph, the last armor. Faith that overcomes suffering. Faith or trust. I'll just share one verse. Verse 19, therefore let those who suffer according to the will of God commit their souls to him in doing God as to a faithful creator. Here, a faithful creator. The faithful creator. As we commit our lives to do good, regardless of the suffering, however difficult it is, we have determined to do good. I have freedom, the first spiritual armor. We have freedoms. We have power. I have hope. Under all these, I just do what I need to do. Follow the will of God and do what is pleasing to God. That means we commit to do good. Commit in doing good. Commit our souls to him in doing good as to a faithful creator. That's how I will commit myself to him in doing good. Doesn't mean that, okay, I give you my life and then I care about nothing. But instead, when the world is bad, is going bad, is having a hard time, I still do what is good, what is pleasing to God. Commit our souls to God. Commit our soul to him, to the faithful creator in doing good. In all good doings. In all good doings. In all good doings. Commit your souls to the faithful creator in good doings. That's our last weapon, last armor, faith to trust God. In these difficult days now, we continue to have faith. Trust in God, trust and trust again. May God help us. That's the end of the message today.